The town of Red Creek was a lonely speck on the map, carved out of dust and sweat, where men worked hard and dreams dried up fast. Every evening, when the sun dipped behind the canyon ridge and the air cooled, the townsfolk drifted to Miss Lila's Saloon, a place that offered laughter loud enough to drown out regrets. The piano's tune mixed with the clinking of glasses, and the scent of whiskey and gun oil hung thick in the air. And in that noise and chaos, there was always one man who didn't quite belong. Cole Hart, the cowboy who spoke little, smiled less, and never stayed long. He was a striking figure even in stillness, tall, broad-shouldered, and built from long days under the sun. His hat stayed low, shadowing gray eyes that seemed to look right through people. He sat alone at his table in the far corner, back to the wall, nursing the same drink every night but never finishing it. The women of Red Creek had long since made him a mystery to be solved, a challenge to be conquered, but no one ever did. Cole's silence wasn't arrogance, it was armor. People said he'd once been a gunslinger, or maybe an outlaw turned rancher. Others whispered that he'd lost his nerve in a duel and never recovered. But none of them knew the truth. Cole Hart had once been a man full of laughter, warmth, and hope, until love broke him. Years ago, back east, he'd been engaged to Clara James, a woman who believed in poetry and prayer and had taught him that a man could build more than fences and barns, he could build a life. She'd been his beginning and his peace. But one cruel summer, fever swept through their small settlement, and Clara was gone before he could even fetch help. Cole buried her beneath a willow tree by the river, and when he walked away from her grave, he left behind the man he used to be. He drifted west after that, chasing work that didn't require conversation, mending fences, breaking horses, building ranches that never felt like home. Eventually, he bought a stretch of land outside Red Creek, raised cattle, and lived by one rule: don't get close to anything that can be taken away. In town, people respected him, even feared him a little. He was the man who never drank too much, never missed a shot, and never spoke unless necessary. When fights broke out, he didn't join in, he just watched, calm as stone, until the dust settled. But the women, oh, they tried. They called him the Iron Cowboy. They'd brush their skirts past his table, toss him compliments sweet as honey, and laugh loud enough to draw his eyes. He'd nod, polite as ever, but his gaze would drift back to his glass unmoved. To them, he was a mystery. To Cole, they were reminders of what he'd already lost. Miss Lila herself had once tried to coax him into conversation. She'd poured him an extra drink on the house and said, "You keep staring at that glass like it asks not tell you a secret." Cole had just smiled faintly and replied, "If it does, Miss Lila, I ain't sure I want to hear it." That was Cole Hart, always measured, always distant. He lived in silence because silence couldn't betray him. But that night, as thunder rolled across the sky and rain began to fall in heavy sheets, something changed. The saloon doors slammed open, wind sweeping through like a spirit. Every head turned. And there she was, a stranger, drenched and defiant, her eyes lit with something wild. The piano went quiet. The laughter faded. And for the first time in years, Cole Hart looked up and didn't look away. His world, steady and still for so long, began to tremble, just enough for a heartbeat to slip through the silence. The night rain fell like shards of glass over Red Creek, turning the dirt streets into rivers of mud. Lightning cracked across the black sky, followed by a growl of thunder that made the lamps in Miss Lila's saloon flicker. The piano player froze mid-note. The laughter died. Then, with a long creak and a burst of wind, the saloon doors swung open. Every eye turned. She stood there in the doorway, a stranger, soaked from head to toe, her cloak heavy with rain, boots splattered with the dirt of 100 miles. A single lantern flame caught the gold strands of her hair, tangled and dripping, and cast a faint shimmer across her face. She wasn't the kind of woman Red Creek was used to seeing. There was no paint on her cheeks, no practiced smile. Her eyes, dark and alive, moved over the room like she was weighing every soul inside. The men at the bar straightened. The women narrowed their eyes. Miss Lila, always one for manners, grabbed the towel and stepped forward, saying kindly, "You looking for shelter, sweetheart?" "You found it." The stranger nodded once, slow and cautious. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice low, a little rough like she hadn't spoken much in days. She crossed the room, and every bootstep echoed. The crowd parted, curiosity thick in the air. When she reached the bar, she peeled back her hood, revealing a face too striking for a place like Red Creek, sharp yet soft, tired yet unbroken. She ordered a drink, nothing fancy, and paid with a silver coin that clinked loudly in the silence. Colehart, from his usual corner, hadn't moved since she walked in. His glass of whiskey sat untouched. He'd seen strangers before, drifters, gamblers, widows, but none who carried themselves like her. There was something in the way she stood back straight despite exhaustion, eyes alert even in safety, that caught him off guard. He'd trained himself not to notice beauty anymore, but this wasn't beauty. It was something fiercer, something alive. "Who's that?" one of the ranch hands whispered to another. "Trouble," came the muttered reply. Maybe they were right. The stranger didn't give her name, didn't explain why she was out alone in the storm. She just sat quietly at the bar, her hand steady on the glass, watching the door like she expected someone to follow her. Cole could feel it, the tension humming through the air, the kind that comes before a fight or a confession. He tried to look away, to mind his own business as he always did, but found his eyes returning to her again and again. There was something familiar about the guarded set of her shoulders, the way she hid her fear beneath pride. After a while, Miss Lila broke the silence. "You got a place to stay, honey?" "Ain't safe out there tonight." The woman's eyes flicked toward the window, where lightning flashed across the hills. "I'll be gone by morning," she said. "Just need a roof for the night." Miss Lila nodded, sensing more than was said, and handed her a room key. But even as she climbed the stairs, the saloon kept whispering speculation about who she was, where she came from, and why her hands were calloused like a man's. Cole stayed long after she disappeared upstairs. The rain kept falling, drowning out the low murmur of voices. He didn't understand why he couldn't shake the sound of her voice or the look in her eyes when she scanned the room, half desperate, half defiant. He told himself she was just another traveler passing through. But somewhere deep in his chest, something he'd buried years ago stirred, a feeling that made his steady hands unsteady and his quiet heart restless. When he finally stepped outside into the rain, he glanced up toward the window where a dim light still burned. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But for the first time in years, Colehart wanted to find out. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the town of Red Creek washed clean but restless. Mud pooled along the streets, the smell of wet earth mingling with smoke from the saloon's chimney. Inside Miss Lila's, the day started slow. Men drifted in for coffee, women for gossip. And every whisper carried the same name, the stranger. Elaravale, that's what she finally told Miss Lila when pressed for it. No one had heard it before. It wasn't a name that belonged to this town or any town nearby. And though she smiled when she said it, there was a shadow behind that smile, something guarded and sharp. Colehart came in just before noon, as he always did on Saturdays. Hat low, jaw tight, movements quiet. He didn't expect to see her again. But there she was standing near the bar in borrowed clothes that Miss Lila had given her. Sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, helping carry mugs and wipe tables like she'd been there for years. The saloon grew noisier as the miners and ranchers filled it for the midday break. Men who'd spent the morning shoveling, hauling, or roping now leaned back in chairs and watched the new woman with hungry eyes. She ignored them at first, kept her head down, but attention in Red Creek was like wildfire. It didn't take much to catch. A ranch hand named Duke Miller, a man twice her size and half her manners, swaggered up with a grin too wide for his own good. "Ain't seen you round here before," he drawled, leaning against the bar beside her. "You passin' through or settin' roots?" Ilara didn't look at him. "Just passin' through," Duke chuckled. "Shame. Pretty thing like you ought to stay a while. Red Creek could use a bit of sunshine." "I'm not the sunshine kind," she replied flatly, setting down the glass she was drying. Laughter rippled through the room, some amused, some surprised. The kind of laugh that always made a man's pride turn mean. Duke's smirk faltered, replaced by something darker. He reached out and caught her wrist, not hard, but enough to make her still. "Now that ain't polite, sweetheart," he said, lowering his voice. "Maybe you ought to learn how to talk to folks better." That's when the sound came a sharp metallic, click quiet but unmistakable. Colehart had risen from his corner, revolver half drawn, eyes steady as ice. Let her go. The whole saloon froze. The piano went silent. Even Duke, who'd seen his share of fights, went pale. Everyone knew Colehart wasn't the kind of man who bluffed. Duke dropped her wrist like it burned him and stepped back, muttering, "Ain't worth it." He slunk away, the room easing into tense silence. Ilara's gaze followed Cole for a long moment, searching, measuring. Then she said quietly, "Didn't need saving." Cole holstered his gun, his tone even. "Didn't say you did." He sat back down, the storm between them settling into something wordless but charged. Around them, the saloon buzzed again, though no one dared approach either of them. Miss Lila, watching from behind the counter, shook her head softly. "That man's been stoned for years," she whispered to herself, "and now she's gone and made him move." Ilara finished her chores and slipped out the back door, the morning sun catching in her hair. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. But when he looked out through the saloon window later and saw her walking down the street with her chin high and her pace quick, he felt something stir inside him, an old instinct, one he thought he'd buried with the past. She was trouble, no doubt. Trouble with a reason to hide and eyes that didn't trust a soul. And yet, for the first time in years, Colehart wasn't sure he minded a little trouble. Days passed in Red Creek, but the town couldn't stop talking about Ilara Vale, the woman who'd appeared from the storm and disarmed a drunk ranch hand without breaking stride. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she'd killed a man, others that she'd stolen from one. No one really knew, and she never corrected them. She kept to herself, doing odd chores around Miss Lila's saloon to earn her keep, washing glasses, sweeping floors, and disappearing before sundown. She spoke little and smiled less, but there was a quiet strength about her that made people think twice before crossing her. And then there was Colehart. He told himself he didn't care who she was or what she'd done. But somehow, every day found him back at the saloon long after he'd finished his work on the ranch. He'd sit in his usual corner, hat tilted low, pretending to ignore her while noticing everything. The way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear, the careful way she handled people, the way her eyes always flicked toward the door as if expecting someone to walk through it. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the porch behind the saloon, boots dusty, elbows on her knees, staring out at the dry plain stretching to the horizon. He paused, unsure why he'd followed, and said quietly, "You planning on running again?" She didn't turn. "That depends. You planning on stopping me?" Cole leaned against the post beside her. "Ain't my business where you go. Then why are you here?" she asked, finally looking up at him. Her voice wasn't harsh, just tired, like someone who'd been running too long to believe in kindness anymore. He didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. There was something about her that unsettled the stillness he'd built his life around. "Storm's coming tonight," he said instead. "Ain't smart to be out on the plains in weather like that." She gave a faint, crooked smile. "You always talk in warnings, Mr. Hart?" "Only when someone looks like they're fixing to make a mistake." For the first time, she laughed soft, short, almost surprised. You think I haven't already?" He studied her quietly, the scar of a question forming on his tongue. "What are you running from, Alara?" For a long moment she said nothing. The wind tugged at her cloak, and the faint hum of the saloon piano drifted through the open door. Then, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, she said, "Men who think they own everything they touch." Cole's jaw tightened. There was more behind those words than she was letting on. He could hear the truth hiding between the syllables. A woman doesn't cross deserts and storms unless she has a reason to fear what is behind her. He crouched down beside her, lowering his voice. "If you're in trouble, Red Creek ain't the best place to hide. Too many eyes. Too many mouths." She looked at him then, eyes steady and unflinching. "I've hidden worse places." He wanted to ask more, wanted to know who had hurt her, what she'd left behind, but the look in her eyes warned him off. It wasn't trust yet, but it wasn't defiance either. It was something in between. When the first drops of rain began to fall, Cole straightened, tipped his hat, and said, "If you need a dry roof, the Hart Ranch has plenty of space." She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him as he walked away. That night, thunder rolled over Red Creek again, and Alara lay awake in her small room above the saloon, listening to the rain and thinking about the cowboy who'd offered help without asking for anything in return. She'd met men who took, men who lied, men who owned, but never one who simply stood beside her, silent and sure, asking for nothing. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered what it would feel like to stop running. The storm that rolled over Red Creek that night left the world scrubbed clean by morning, but for Alara Vale, nothing inside her felt lighter. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling of her tiny rented room above Miss Lila's saloon, listening to the thunder fade and the rain turn soft against the window. Every drop reminded her of hoofbeats of the men who might still be out there looking for her. Downstairs, the saloon woke slowly, the smell of coffee and wood smoke filling the air. Cole Hart was already there, sitting in his usual corner. He didn't look at her when she came down, but he noticed everything. The faint circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she seemed to brace herself before speaking to anyone. She poured coffee for the few early customers, moving like a woman who wanted to stay unseen. But when the room emptied out, Cole spoke. "You sleep?" She glanced his way, half smiling. "Did you?" He shrugged. "Didn't try." Something in his tone made her stop. She turned toward him fully for the first time, really looking. Beneath the calm exterior, there was a familiar weariness, the kind that comes from carrying ghosts. "Cole," she said after a pause, "why do you keep watching me?" He leaned back in his chair. "I watch everybody. Habit." "No," she said quietly. "You don't." He almost smiled at that. "Maybe I see someone who's been through hell and still standing." For a long time, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with a kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things neither dared to say. Then Alara exhaled, as if deciding something. "You ever tell anyone the truth, Mr. Hart?" "Depends on who's a skin." "I think it's time I told someone mine," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray the effort it took. Cole straightened, but didn't interrupt. She set down the coffee pot and sat across from him. "I wasn't always running," she began. "Once I was married. To a man with more money than God and half his mercy. He owned land, mines, men. And me." Her words were calm, but her fingers twisted in her lap. "At first, I thought it was love. He promised me safety, a home. I was foolish enough to believe a woman could be safe in a house built on fear." She looked out the window, where the morning light hit the dusty street. "When I found out he'd killed a man someone who tried to help me, I ran. Took what little I could and didn't look back. He sent bounty hunters after me, told them I'd stolen from him. In a way I did. I stole my freedom." Cole's jaw tightened. He'd known pain before, but the quiet in her voice was a kind of strength he hadn't seen in anyone for years. "You got a name for this man?" he asked softly. He had. Elara nodded. Baron Vance, you might have heard of him. Owns most of the land east of here. Everyone had. A ruthless man whose name carried weight and blood. Red Creek's too close to his reach, Cole warned. If he wants you back, he'll send someone. Her eyes lifted to meet his, steady and unflinching. Then I guess I'll just have to be ready. He admired that, her fire, her refusal to break. Still, something in him shifted. He wanted to protect her, though she clearly didn't want saving. Maybe that was what drew him in. She wasn't helpless. She was surviving. He reached for his hat, stood, and said, "If he comes here, you won't be alone." She stared after him as he left, the door swinging shut behind him. No promises, no soft words, just truth. For the first time since she'd run, Elara Vale believed someone might mean it. By the next week, Red Creek was buzzing with talk. Rumors had grown legs and galloped through the streets faster than a wild stallion. Elara Vale, the mysterious woman who'd arrived in the rain, was no longer just a stranger. She was the subject of every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance. Some said she'd killed her husband. Others claimed she'd been part of a gang that robbed a bank down south. A few believed she'd bewitched Cole Hart, the town's most untouchable cowboy, turning him soft. Cole heard it all but didn't care. He'd spent too many years ignoring the noise of small minds. But this time, the whispers had teeth. Because beneath the gossip, there was truth. Someone had sent word to the sheriff. It started quietly. A new face appeared in town, a man wearing a badge that gleamed too clean for Red Creek dust. Sheriff Waylon Briggs wasn't their usual lawman. He'd come from the next county over, claiming he was just passing through. But his questions made it clear he wasn't. He asked about a woman traveling alone, about a lady with a gold locket and a scar on her left hand. Miss Lila heard enough to know danger when she saw it. That evening, when Elara stepped outside to draw water from the pump, she found Cole waiting near the hitching post, his expression tight. "You need to pack a bag," he said. She froze. "Why?" "Sheriff Briggs ain't here for a drink," he said. "He's here for you. Says there's a bounty." Her fingers clenched around the water pail. "How much?" $500. He met her gaze, voice low. "Alive." The word hung heavy between them. Elara swallowed hard, a familiar dread clawing at her throat. "Vance," she whispered. "He found me." Cole nodded once. He'd guessed as much. Baron Vance wasn't a man who let go of what he thought belonged to him. "I can leave tonight," she said quickly. "I'll head north." "No," Cole interrupted, his tone firm. "You won't make it 10 miles before they're on you. I've been running a long time." "Cole," she snapped, anger flashing in her eyes. "I know how to survive." He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "And maybe it's time you didn't have to." For a moment, they just stood there, the air between them thick with rain and tension. Elara wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need saving. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of waking every morning wondering who might be tracking her. Inside the saloon, a glass shattered. Miss Lila's voice rose. Then the door swung open, and Sheriff Briggs stepped out, hand resting on his revolver. "Evenin', Miss Vale," he called, his tone too polite to be friendly. "You and I got some business to settle." Cole moved before Elara could react, positioning himself between her and the sheriff. "Don't think she's got any business with you." Briggs smirked. 500 says otherwise. "I don't take kindly to men chasing women for another man's coin," Cole said evenly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You planning to stand in the way of the law?" Cole's thumb brushed the handle of his gun. "If that's what you're calling yourself." The saloon went silent. The men who'd once laughed at Cole's indifference now watched, breath held, as tension coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Briggs studied him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "You can't protect her forever, Hart. Men like Vance don't stop." Neither do I, Cole said. The sheriff left soon after, but his words lingered like smoke. Alara turned to Cole, her heart pounding. You didn't have to do that. He met her eyes, calm and steady. Yes, I did. That night, as the town settled into uneasy silence, Alara packed a small bag, but not to leave. She went to Cole's ranch instead, and though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew what it meant. Running was over. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The dawn came pale and uneasy, streaking the plains with ribbons of silver light. A stillness hung over Red Creek, the kind that comes before a storm not of weather but of men. Colehart saddled his horse in silence, the leather creaking under his hands. Across the barn, Alara Vale tightened the strap of her small satchel, her movement sharp with resolve. Neither spoke much. Both knew what was coming. By mid-morning, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon riders. 5 of them. The kind of men who didn't bother to hide their purpose. One carried a rifle, another a coil of rope. All wore the hard expression of those who hunted for pay. Baron Vance's bounty hunters had arrived. Cole cursed under his breath. They found you faster than I thought. Alara's eyes flashed with both fear and defiance. Then I was right. I should have kept running. He stepped closer, gripping her wrist gently. You'd never make it alone. These men don't stop until they've got what they came for. Her jaw tightened. And what about you, Cole? You going to risk your life for someone you barely know? He held her gaze. Maybe I'm not doing it for you. The words confused her until she saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't. He just fighting to save her. He was fighting because of everything he'd lost before. Protecting her meant protecting the part of himself he thought had died years ago. They didn't wait for the riders to reach the ranch. Cole loaded supplies into the saddlebags, dried meat, a canteen, spare ammunition, and handed her a revolver. Ever used one? She nodded. Once. Didn't miss. He almost smiled. Let's hope you don't today. They rode hard, the plains stretching endlessly around them. Wind tore at their hair and clothes, the sun already high and merciless. The land offered little shelter, just rolling hills and scattered brush. The sound of hooves behind them grew louder, a grim reminder that the past was closing in. By noon, the chase was full on. A gunshot cracked across the open fields, a warning more than a hit. Cole turned his horse sharply, cutting through a dry creek bed. Head for the rocks ahead. He shouted. Alara followed, her heart pounding. Dust filled her lungs, her vision blurred by sunlight and fear. When they reached the outcropping, Cole dismounted and helped her down. We'll make our stand here, he said, crouching behind a boulder. They'll kill you, she whispered. Not if I shoot first. The first 2 riders appeared, rifles raised. Cole fired once, twice, and one man fell from his horse. The others scattered for cover, returning fire. Bullets whined through the air, striking stone. Alara pressed her back to the rocks, breathing hard, clutching the revolver in trembling hands. Then she heard it, the familiar cruel voice of Waylon Briggs, the sheriff turned hunter. You can't run forever, sweetheart. Your man can't save you now. Alara's eyes hardened. She stood, took aim, and fired. The bullet grazed Briggs' shoulder, sending him sprawling from his saddle. Cole glanced over, impressed despite the danger. Remind me never to doubt you again. The battle raged for what felt like hours. When the dust finally settled, 2 riders were dead, 1 wounded, and the rest fleeing. Briggs limped away, clutching his arm, swearing vengeance. Cole turned to Alara. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with dust, but her eyes, those fierce, unbroken eyes, met his without fear. Now you see why I don't stop running, she said. He nodded, holstering his gun. And now you see why I don't let go. They rode again before sunset, heading west toward the canyons where the bounty hunters wouldn't follow. The plains behind them were quiet again, but the silence wasn't peace. It was a promise of what was yet to come. because both of them knew this wasn't the end. Baron Vance would send more. And next time, the fight wouldn't be just for freedom, it would be for love. By the time Colehart and Alara Vale reached the canyons, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in gold and blood-orange streaks. The world seemed quieter there, tucked between red stone walls that whispered with the wind. To anyone else, it would have felt desolate, but to Alara, it was the first place that hadn't felt like a cage. Cole led the horses down a narrow trail into a hollow hidden by mesquite and scrub. "We'll camp here," he said, dismounting. "Ain't much, but it'll keep us out of sight." Alara slid off her horse, her legs trembling from exhaustion. They'd ridden for hours with barely a word, both lost in thought. Now, as the horses drank from a shallow pool, the silence between them felt different, less tense, more weighted with unspoken things. Cole built a small fire, the orange light flickering over his face. It softened the sharp lines of his jaw, the weariness in his eyes. Alara sat across from him, hugging her knees, watching the flames dance. "You ever hide here before?" she asked. "Once," he said, "years back. I was running from my own trouble." She tilted her head. "What kind?" He looked into the fire for a long time before answering. "I killed a man. Didn't mean to, but he left me no choice." He heard someone who didn't deserve it. His voice was quiet but steady, as if he'd made peace with it long ago. "Law didn't care about reasons, so I took off. Spent a year out here before I went back and cleared my name." Alara studied him, seeing not a killer, but a man who'd learned mercy the hard way. "You went back," she said softly. "You faced it." "Yeah," he said. "Because someone told me once running don't make you free. Facing it does." His words lingered in her mind long after they fell silent. She thought of Baron Vance, of the nights she'd lain awake waiting for footsteps outside her door, of how every sunrise had felt like borrowed time. Maybe Cole was right. Maybe freedom wasn't just distance, it was choosing to stop being afraid. After they ate, Cole spread his coat on the ground beside the fire. "You should get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." She hesitated, looking at him in the firelight. "And you?" "When's the last time you slept?" He gave a half smile. "Don't rightly remember." She laid down anyway, the warmth of the fire easing the ache in her body, but her mind wouldn't rest. The crackle of flames, the smell of smoke, the steady sound of Cole's breathing, it all felt too intimate, too safe. She wasn't used to safety. Hours passed before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cole, why do you care what happens to me?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his tone was low, honest. "Because the first time I saw you, you looked like someone who'd stopped believing anyone could care. And I know what that feels like." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something so simple and meant it. She turned toward him, the firelight catching the faint scar above his brow. "What if they find us again?" she asked. "Then we fight again," he said. Together. The word together echoed softly in her heart. For years, her life had been nothing but escape, isolation, silence. But in that canyon, under a sky full of stars, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. As she drifted into sleep, she dreamed not of running, but of staying. Cole kept watch until the moon sank behind the rocks, his rifle resting across his knees. Every few minutes, he glanced at her sleeping form beside the fire. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring: more riders, more danger, maybe worse, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man without purpose. Protecting her had become something more than duty. It was the first thing that made his world start turning again. 3 days passed in the canyon. 3 days of silence, of shared glances and few words. Colehart and Alara Vale moved like ghosts through the rocky landscape, quiet, alert, waiting. But when the food began to run low and the horses grew restless, Cole knew it was time. They couldn't hide forever. "We're heading back," he said one morning, tightening his saddle strap. Alara froze. "Back?" To Red Creek? Cole, that's suicide. Maybe, he said. But Briggs won't quit, and Vance's men want to stop till they reassure you're dead or captured. Out here, we're sitting ducks. Back in town, I've got eyes, friends, and walls. And I ain't letting them chase you into the ground, Ilara wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him she couldn't go back to another trap, another man deciding her fate. But when she met his eyes, she saw no ownership there, just conviction. And maybe, for the first time, trust. So they rode at dawn. The plain stretched wide and silent, painted gold by the rising sun. Every hoofbeat echoed with the question neither dared ask. What if this was the end? When Red Creek came into view, Ilara's stomach twisted. The town looked the same, dusty streets, crooked signs, the saloon's windows glinting in the light, but something felt off. People watched them as they rode in, their faces shuddered, uncertain. Word had spread. Everyone knew. Miss Lila was the first to meet them at the saloon door. Her usual sharpness was gone, replaced by worry. You shouldn't have come back, she hissed. Sheriff Briggs has been stirring things up. Says he's got papers signed by the governor. Says you're wanted for theft and murder. Ilara stiffened. Lies, she whispered. Lila nodded grimly. I know that. But half this town don't. He's got folks scared, Cole. He's got 'em believing he's the law. Cole's jaw tightened. Then it's time someone reminded him what law used to mean. He told Lila to keep Ilara inside while he went to find Briggs. But Ilara refused. I've run long enough, she said, voice steady. If I don't face this, I'll be running the rest of my life. There was no arguing with her this time. Together, they walked down the main street, side by side. People stopped what they were doing, blacksmith, grocer, even the children playing in the dust. The sight of them together, Cole, the man who'd never looked twice at anyone, and the woman everyone whispered about, was enough to draw the whole town's attention. They found Briggs outside the sheriff's office, leaning on the porch rail with a smug smile. His arm was bandaged from the wound Ilara had given him. Well, well, he drawled. The runaway and her cowboy hero. You've saved me the trouble of hunting you down. Cole's voice was low but sharp. You ain't law here, Briggs. Never were? Briggs laughed. Law's whoever's got the badge and the gun, Hart. And right now, that's me. He reached for his revolver, but Cole was faster. The shot rang out before anyone could breathe. Briggs' gun flew from his hand, landing in the dust. Cole didn't aim to kill, just to end it. The crowd gasped. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Cole spoke, voice carrying clear and strong. This woman's no criminal. She's been hunted by a man with money and power who thinks a wife is a piece of property. You all know what kind of justice that is. Ilara stepped forward, trembling but resolute. I'm not asking for pity, she said. Just a chance to live. To be free. The silence stretched until Miss Lila stepped out from the saloon. She's telling the truth, she said firmly. And if any man here thinks otherwise, he can answer to me. That broke the spell. A few men nodded. Someone clapped. The tension in the air began to crack. Briggs, humiliated and bleeding again, stumbled away muttering threats, but no one followed him. Ilara turned to Cole, her eyes wide with disbelief. It's over? He holstered his gun. Maybe not for good, he said softly. But for now, yeah. It's over. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She was standing still, and the ground beneath her felt solid. Cole tipped his hat. Welcome home, Ilara. And in that small, dusty town, under the watchful eyes of the people who'd once doubted her, a woman who'd been hunted became something else free. The sun was at its highest when Red Creek held its breath. The air was thick with heat and dust, the kind that clung to the skin and made the world feel still. Every door along the main street stood open. Every voice was silent. At the center of it all stood Cole Hart, broad-shouldered, calm, his hand resting easy on the grip of his revolver. Beside him, Elara Vale stood tall, her dress rippling slightly in the dry wind. Fear flickered behind her eyes, but it didn't own her anymore. She had run for years, but not today. At the far end of the street, Sheriff Waylon Briggs returned, limping from the wound she had given him. But this time, he didn't come alone. 3 armed men followed, bounty hunters with the look of wolves closing in for the kill. And behind them rode a carriage drawn by black horses, the kind only a rich man owned. When it stopped, a tall figure stepped out. Clean boots, polished cane, and a cruel smile. Baron Vance. The sight of him froze the town. His reputation had arrived long before he did, ruthless, powerful. A man who thought money could make him God. He looked at Elara with the cold affection of a collector reclaiming stolen property. "My wife," he said, voice smooth as oil. "You've caused me quite the inconvenience." Elara didn't move. "I'm not your wife anymore," he chuckled softly, as if humoring a child. "The law disagrees. I have the papers, the witnesses, the sheriff. You are mine by name and by bond." Cole's voice cut through the heavy air. "She ain't yours, Vance, not by law. Not by God, not anymore." Vance turned to him, amused. "And who are you to say so, cowboy?" Cole stepped forward, boots crunching on the dry earth. "The man who'll stop you if you try to take her," the crowd murmured. Tension coiled in every breath. Briggs smirked, drawing his gun halfway. "This ain't your fight, Hart. Step aside before you end up like the others who crossed Vance." Cole's jaw set. "Guess I'll take my chances." The standoff stretched thin as a whipcord. Dust swirled in the sunlight. A horse snorted. Someone gasped. And then a single gunshot cracked through the still air. No one knew who fired first. But when the echo faded, Briggs was down, clutching his shoulder again. Vance's men reached for their rifles, but Cole moved like lightning. 2 shots, 2 men fell. The last turned and fled. Baron Vance stumbled backward, pale with disbelief. "You fool," he spat. "You'll hang for this." Cole leveled his revolver, eyes hard as steel. "Maybe, but not before you answer for what you did." The Baron sneered, but his bravado faltered. "You think killing me will change anything?" Cole shook his head. "No, but letting you walk away sure won't." Before he could pull the trigger, Elara stepped forward. Her hand touched Cole's arm, steady and sure. "No," she whispered. "He wants blood. Don't give him what he wants." The weight of her words stopped him. He lowered the gun slowly. Elara turned to Vance. "You can tell your men, your lawyers, your world of lies, but you'll never own me again. I'd rather die free in the dust than live chained in your house." Her voice carried across the street, strong and clear. For the first time, Baron Vance looked uncertain, like a man facing something he couldn't buy. With the crowd watching, he stepped back toward his carriage, humiliated, broken in a way pride couldn't hide. As the carriage rolled away, Red Creek erupted in whispers. Cole holstered his gun, turning to Elara. She met his eyes and smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her features. "It's over," she said. He looked down the empty street, the dust still settling. "No," he murmured. "It's just beginning." Later, as twilight painted the sky in deep purples and gold, they stood on the saloon porch. The wind carried the scent of sage and freedom. Cole rested his head against his chest, glancing at her. "Where to now?" she asked. He smiled, a rare, quiet thing. "Wherever you want to go." For the first time in her life, Elara didn't look back. She reached for his hand, and together they stepped off the porch, walking toward the horizon, 2 souls who had outrun the past and found something worth stopping for. And as the stars rose over Red Creek, it was said that the cowboy who once ignored every woman in the saloon never looked away from one again.